Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
I'll do a brief correction, Tom. I'm not the former CEO quite yet. My final day as CEO is April 1st, but I can let you in on very, very fresh news, and that is that yesterday the WITF board selected my successor, and that is Ron Hetrick, who's currently our Senior Vice President of Finance and Administration. He's a wonderful, talented fellow. I'm very pleased that someone that I admire and respect so much will take up the flag and march forward. So I intend to stay in the area and continue to work on the Project PA Post that Tom mentioned and some other things as well. My broader topic today is described as journalism in a post-trust world. I've been a journalist, a teacher of journalism, and a news media executive, and I've practiced my profession in 3 American states and 2 nations abroad. And I will tell you candidly that I'm worried. I'm worried about the fact that Americans, by almost every measure, have lost dramatic levels of trust in their democratic institutions, including the news media, over the past half-century. This decline has been documented and analyzed most recently by the Knight Commission on Trust, Media, and Democracy with the support of the Aspen Institute. Now let's see if the clicker is working. There we go. Why has trust declined? The short answer is when institutions perform poorly, people lose trust in them. The top causes identified in the report were government gridlock, global financial shocks, including the 2008 Great Recession, a steady increase in political polarization, an increasing gap between wealthy and the poor, and racial tensions. Now, it's important to define trust. Trust is not agreement, let alone unanimity. Trust means that citizens believe the political process will protect the national interest, not partisan or personal interests, and that it will uphold the law. At the core of a democratic republic like ours is the ability of citizens to hold those in power accountable to them, citizens, us. And a trusted and free press is a key mechanism by which that accountability happens, and it's therefore essential to the functioning of our democracy, or so it's been thought and believed going back to the foundation of the republic. But something has happened. In 1964's Gallup poll, 74% of Americans said they trusted the national government to do what is right just about always or most of the time. Gallup polls this every year, and by 2015, that measure had dropped under 25%, believing that government did it just about right all the time. There were a few upticks in the Reagan and Clinton administrations, and oh so briefly after 9/11, as you can see from the graph. The decline in trust isn't only in government. Trust has declined in many institutions. Not that it makes us in the news media feel any better. Organized religion, big business, public schools, banks, criminal justice, TV news, they're all under 50%. Congress, by the way, clocks in at the bottom at 8%. Only the military, small business, and the police are above 50% and have increased in trust in this time period. In the graph, those are the top 3 bars. Yet the interrelationship of media and democracy is essential. Citizens need journalists for the information that they provide at every level of governance. Do you have time to attend all the township meetings and the sessions of the Pennsylvania State House? Someone has to do it, and that someone is a journalist. Governments need media to communicate and explain their policies to citizens. But this relationship has been strained many times over our history, including today. Why has trust declined? The Knight Commission identified 7 factors. Perhaps counterintuitively, 58% of citizens say the proliferation of news sources online makes it harder to be well-informed. There's a clear sense of being overwhelmed. Believe me, journalists feel it too. There used to be a news cycle, you know, more news, less news, more. No, it's a steady tsunami now. There's also something called media disintermediation. Can't you just wait to try that on somebody? It means that we are consuming more of our news through social networks rather than directly through a news provider, from a news provider. This makes it tougher to determine if the source is a quality news organization or a dubious source with a motive. The third factor is the lack of a distinction, lack of a separation between reporting and commentary. You know, in a newspaper layout, it's relatively easy to distinguish a news story from a column or an editorial. But as talk radio and cable expanded their commentary all of the time to fill airtime, and social media opened pathways for people to comment, citizens increasingly aren't sure whether they're reading news or opinion, and citizens resent the lack of the distinction between the two. The fourth factor is the perception of bias, which is strongly related to political identity. A recent survey found that 26% of Democrats and 67% of Republicans say there's a great deal of political bias in coverage. Trust has also declined because of a fifth factor, the spread of deliberate misinformation and disinformation, deliberately false, intended to confuse. Now, propaganda is not new, but today's platforms make it far easier to distribute false information, whether the originator is an advocacy group, a foreign power, or a digitally savvy entrepreneur looking to earn a fraction of a penny per click from each deceived user. Those micropayments, they add up fast. The decline of local news is a sixth factor. Americans generally trust local newspapers and local TV news more than they do national media. That's probably because a local paper or a TV station is a tangible presence in your community, and you may have known reporters as neighbors or as friends. But there's been a precipitous decline in the number of reporters nationwide, and it's much less likely that you'll ever get to meet or know a reporter. The number of reporters nationwide has declined by 50%. Finally, criticism of the media has been weaponized for political advantage. Ideological news sources have an incentive to attack mainstream media, and they do. Now, to a certain extent, all politicians treat the press as hostile because there's political advantage in claiming that negative coverage is biased coverage. I'm old enough to remember when Richard Nixon railed against the press and sent out his vice president, Spiro Agnew, to describe journalists as naturing nabobs of negativism, in William Seyfarth's famous phrase. And of course, politicians and pundits attack news media because it works. As Rich Bond, who's a former chairman of the Republican National Committee, put it, there's some strategy to bashing the liberal media. If you watch any great coach, what they try to do is work the refs. Maybe the ref will cut you a little slack on the next one. This isn't the first time in our history that the news media have come under fire and have been viewed with great skepticism, despite our distinctive American support for a free press. I think it's fair to say we Americans are ambivalent about the news media. We've encouraged the dissemination of news through law, the First Amendment, and with policies like low postal rates for the distribution of newspapers going back to colonial times. But the First Amendment, remember, was not drafted to benefit the press. It's a trust placed in the press on behalf of all of us. Newspapers in the early republic were largely partisan, each one of them associated with a political party or faction. Then we had steam-powered presses and cheap newsprint, and it reduced the cost of production and the number of papers grew. When advertising revenue became more important than political party subsidies, overt partisanship declined. But it was also clear from periods like yellow journalism in the 1890s and tabloid journalism in the 1920s onward that reform was needed. So improvements did come internally, including from new newspaper owners. Alfred Oakes purchased the New York Times in 1896 with a commitment to detailed factual reporting. And Mary Baker Eddy founded the Christian Science Monitor in 1908 to be non-sensationalist. And the first school of journalism was founded in 1908 as well at the University of Missouri. To my great sadness, it should have been Penn State. Really, it should have been Penn State. There have always been attacks on the news media for mistakes and excesses, and especially when a new medium arrives to disrupt the existing media landscape. In the early 20th century, there was radio, And in the mid-century, we had television. Now, broadcasters didn't and don't have the same First Amendment protections as newspapers. In fact, some of you may remember the Fairness Doctrine, which was in force from 1949 to 1987. And it required broadcasters to present issues of public importance in an honest, equitable, and balanced way. Many broadcasters simply avoided opinion programs altogether to stay compliant. It wasn't until the Fairness Doctrine was eliminated that talk radio could present partisan viewpoints without any opposing or varied viewpoints. Cable TV, which was never regulated as much as broadcasting is, contributed another source of partisan views, because in 1996, both Fox News and MSNBC went on the air. Now, straightforward news has been a part of both of those channels from the very beginning, but keep in mind they're 24/7. And so to fill the time, commentary became the cheap way to do it. News is, comparatively speaking, more expensive. And the effect was to blur that line between reporting and opinion in the minds of viewers. For the first 2 centuries of our nation, one of the concerns of the news media was its limited number of outlets or channels, and the difficulty, therefore, that ordinary citizens had in accessing those outlets to express themselves. The rise of the internet has addressed the scarcity of outlets issue, but it's done so at the cost of newspapers and reporting itself. And it's created a whole new set of problems for users and society in judging the authenticity and the quality of news. Daily newspaper circulation has been declining in this country since the 1980s, from a high of 60 million subscribers to just 29 million today. More than 1,000 newspapers have gone out of business, and even those that have survived have experienced deep cuts in staff. And as I said, there are half as many reporters working today as only a decade ago. And the reason? The shift of retail and classified ad revenue to online providers, Craigslist, Google, Facebook. Even when newspapers shift from a reliance on print advertising to online advertising, nearly 80% of the online revenue goes to the likes of Google, not to the content or news provider. We call this trading analog dollars for digital dimes. You can see the effects in our region. The LNP papers are smaller in reportorial staff than they used to be. The owners of the Patriot News, the family-owned Advance Publications, dropped print publication days at all of their newspapers nationwide from 7 days to 3 days a week. The Patriot's news staff is about 1/3 of what it used to be. In short, there's something of a perfect storm going on here for journalists, for citizens, and for our democracy. So, what are we as journalists and we as WITF doing about all this? I can tell you that the world of journalism is in a ferment, trying to get a grip on how to cover a president who calls them enemy of the people and who threatens to, quote, open up the libel laws. But there is also a strong belief among journalists that we have work to do to rebuild trust with our fellow citizens. Transparency about how we collect, report, and disseminate the news is a growing trend. Perhaps you've noticed that the inside front page of the New York Times has a column every day about how one of the stories in that edition was covered. Think of it as drawing back the curtain on the sometimes opaque world of reporting. WITF has also recognized the reason for low trust in news is in part the need for what we call news media literacy. What I mean is, we're now trying to tell you how we report the news and give you a chance to ask questions. In fact, I've asked each of our reporters to write a story each quarter about how he or she reported on that story. Reconnecting with our viewers, listeners, and readers is another priority. If the decline in trust is related in part to a lack of a connection to a real person, we can remedy that. Most news organizations I know require reporters and editors to read their comments sections and to respond regularly and respectfully. At WITF, we've taken that a step further with a return to the oldest media platform of all, face-to-face communication. We host events that we call News and Brews. Yes, adult beverages are involved, in which our reporters and editors talk with our news consumers. Now, the next one of these is based around the 40th anniversary of the TMI accident. It's going to be held at the Hop Yard in Middletown on Tuesday, March 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. So please come prepared to share your story of the TMI incident, and you can learn how we plan to cover the anniversary. These trends have also launched something else. WITF has launched our most ambitious initiative ever in the news, something we call PA Post, a digital-first news organization focused on our Commonwealth's government, politics, and policies. Our goal is to bring accountability to our state government with coverage devoted to and delivered to the devices we prefer, whether that's your smartphone, whether it's your tablet or computer. And to do all that while earning your trust. PA Post launched in September with a website, daily e-newsletter, and weekly podcast, and stories ranging from why the state doesn't know where all its gas and oil pipelines are, truly, they do not, to why women account for 3 in 4 teacher positions in the state, but only 1 in 4 superintendent positions. Now, I would point out that on the table back there are 2 things for you to take with you. One is a flyer that just tells you how to access PA Post content online and elsewhere. And with a name like PA Post, we have Post-its, so you'll want some Post-its. As a reporter and as an executive producer, I've covered legislatures and state governments in 3 states, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and North Dakota. And from this long experience, I've concluded that the least well-reported institution in American public life is also the institution with the most significant impact on citizens' lives, their state government. That's because state governments are the primary guarantors of everything from public and higher education to infrastructure to the safety of the very water, air, and food we consume. As a journalist, I must also admit that coverage of state government as traditionally presented is some of the least engaging reportage in any category of news. I wish you wouldn't smile quite so much when I say that. Okay. What we report doesn't seem to break through the relevance barrier, even for citizens who say that state government matters to them. So our conclusion is this. The nation's 5th most popular state, that's us, has an undercovered state government and legislature and lacks the connective tissue of a quality statewide news organization to bring important issues to the attention of all the Commonwealth citizens. And let's face it, what happens here in the nation's 5th largest state affects the nation as a whole, as we've learned in election after election. Philosophically, PA Post is an effort to connect Pennsylvanians to their state and to each other, to knit us together with trusted information and conversation that will establish more shared ownership of both our problems and our solutions. And as someone who thinks of herself as a native Pennsylvanian, I'm devoting my tools and experience to that goal. WITF is prepared to do this, to approach state reporting in a new way and to increase the quantity and quality of coverage. That's because we've been covering these issues for 55 years, starting with TV in 1964, adding radio in 1971, plus print and web and mobile delivery in all the years since. We believe we can begin to empower Pennsylvania citizens once again. Pennsylvania, quite frankly, falls short in most measures of accountability. Open records, campaign financing, open meetings. That's part of the reason why news organizations are so important to fill the gap. Armed with information, citizens have a greater chance to have an impact, to feel they have agency. That's tightly connected to voting and to other forms of civic participation. And by the way, PA Post is distributed statewide, including through media partners. So the output originates from our PA Post staff here in Harrisburg, but it's distributed through the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Post-Gazette, Penn Live. We have an emerging partnership that includes LNP. So for example, you may have noticed that they announced just recently Spotlight PA. Spotlight PA is an investigative team that's going to focus on Harrisburg. The Inquirer has for a long time focused its investigative work in the Delaware Valley. Let's just say that's a target-rich environment. But so is Harrisburg. So the Post-Gazette, the Inquirer, and LNP are joining forces to create a small investigative team. And Spotlight PA and PA Post are working together. So PA Post will cover politics, policy, the agencies, and Spotlight PA will work on investigative stories. So that's what we're up to. So we're going to start your day with PA Post with a weekly newsletter. It's Monday through Friday, first thing in the morning, 7:01, 7:02, it'll hit your email box. It's called The Context. It'll point you to our newest stories and tries to do so with brevity and humor. And you can sign up at papost.org. We have a weekly podcast on Thursdays called State of the State, and you can tap into what's happening under and around the Capitol Dome. And that handout will help you get to all of these. We are going to look deeply into the stories that make a difference in your lives. Why Pennsylvania is a minority of states that elects its judges, or what the funding of state colleges mean to your children and your grandchildren. And we plan to do all of this with 3 journalistic principles in mind. The first principle is facts exist and facts matter. The central job of journalism is to establish the facts and share them as widely as we can. This builds a common base from which to debate the harder questions society faces over its values and who gets what share of the pie. It's shocking, perhaps, that I have to defend a faith in facts, but in our current world, many political leaders and their followers simply deny facts that don't fit their goals. So we must challenge the denial of facts, and we will do so. The second principle of our journalism is we must be independent. If we are to challenge the denial of facts, we must be and perceive to be independent. It's vital that we make the case that the First Amendment exists to protect citizens, not the press, because our democracy is built on the premise that if we, the people, are informed by a vigorous press, we will make wise decisions. Finally, civility is an essential value. If we cannot speak to each other respectfully, democracy will disappear. I've always described WITF as a shout-free zone, where we believe the power of public media can bring people together to listen and to hear each other. And that is a task that WITF and public media have made central to our mission, online, on air, and in panel discussion and community forums. WITF has earned a place in this region by being, well, ubiquitous. We started out as a resource for classrooms. We now have a place in your living room and in your cars. We're a touch away on your Apple or Android phone. If you want to watch Antiques Roadshow or the PBS NewsHour, you can do so online at witf.org. Children can access us through the PBS Kids app, which I do highly recommend to you. And you can access both NPR and WITF FM through the NPR One app. And come visit us at the WITF Public Media Center, which is both a center for public media and a media center for the public. The aggregated audiences and impact are significant. We have more than 140,000 listeners each week, and core listeners spend an astonishing 6+ hours per week with us. TV draws in 233,000 viewers each week, adults and children. And when you add the websites, online listening, visitors, and listeners to our statewide radio network, the impact exceeds 750,000 users each month. We describe our role and relevance as serving educational needs and aspirations across the human lifespan, from early childhood through elder maturity, and supporting all the roles we play in life, from student to adult to parent, with special attention to our role as citizens. We've been able to do this because of the support of this region. We're honored by that support and by your faith in us, and I've just spent 19 years of my life devoted to that long-term goal, and I can tell you with assurance that Ron Hetrick and the current board, whose vice chair is sitting right in front of me, Susan Eckert, and past board chair Deidre Simmons here, will see to it that we will stick to our mission and our commitment to service. So I thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and would absolutely look forward to questions if you have them. Oh, got mics today.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you describe for us how WITF is funded?
How is WITF funded? I'm pleased to report, because it's the sustainable model, it's a diversity of funding. About 54% of our revenue, it's about $11.5 million a year. About 54% of it comes from the communities we serve, and that's a mix of individual contributions and corporate sponsorship, corporate support. This program made possible by. 10% comes from the federal government through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. 34%, I think I'm getting these percentages right, is earned revenue by providing media and production services. One of the things we do, by the way, and should you come and visit, I'll show this to you, we produce and uplink the Pennsylvania Lottery. So when you see that drawing every night, 365 days a year, that's coming out of our studio, and it's being satellite delivered to the 7 commercial stations around the country that air the live drawing, including WGAL. I've got to stop doing that, sorry. 2% comes from state revenue, state funding. It used to be much larger, it's now quite small. And the rest is miscellaneous and including some earnings from our endowment. So that should add up to about $11.5 million. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. I always wondered, I see on all the channels, they'll use the same word to describe a situation. And I've always wondered how they get to that particular word to describe a situation on every single channel. I actually wondered, does somebody come up with how they're going to do it and call you and say, this is the word we're going to use? Because I'm sitting there wondering, in a day, right, as it's breaking, they're all using the same word to describe a situation.
Do you have an example? Sorry, put you on the spot there.
It just seems to happen a lot where you say it's going to be describing a person and using an adjective to describe that person. It's this. Double down, whatever. I mean, they say this person is this. And all of a sudden, every single different channel is using it. And I'm scratching my head going, how do they all use the same adjective to describe that same person?
I would say there are probably 3 possibilities here that could all apply. First of all, the story has a source, right? And it could be that there's a description of an individual that's presented by the police, if it's a police report, or by some other participant in the event, and that becomes the hook on which the story rests. Another is that, God help us, journalists are terrible about jargon, right? I mean, we use it all the time, and in public media, we have acronyms from here to Chambersburg. And we're not nearly as careful as we should be to explain what these things are. And the third is we're copycats. News reporters are news nerds, and they consume gigantic amounts of news. That's me too. And so you're hearing what other people have said, have described a particular situation, and you repeat it. That's a flaw. I mean, we really shouldn't be doing that, and we really shouldn't be doing the, using terms of art that make sense only to us. I saw a survey just this morning in which something like 45% of Americans don't know what an op-ed is. Now, maybe you actually know what an op-ed is. You may not know what its origin is. It means opposite the editorial page. Well, is there anything more legacy than that? I mean, you're reading op-eds not on the opposite of the editorial page most of the time. You're reading it online. So we've got to update our language and not play copycat.
Thank you for coming. Compare the services of Pennsylvania Post to LNP's caucus.
LNP's caucus is a print publication only, okay? And to my understanding, it has a pretty high subscription price. But the key difference is that the caucus aspires to be, and is much of the time, an investigative news organization. It's a small team, I think it's like 3 or 4 people, but they focus on efforts to uncover malfeasance, misuse of funds, bad behavior. As I said, it's a target-rich environment. But their format is print. With the new Spotlight PA partnership that includes the Enquirer and the Post-Gazette, and with PA Post, we will become one of the distributors of that investigative content that will come from Spotlight PA. So we look forward to continued partnership with local newspapers. We have an excellent, WITF and we PA Post have an excellent relationship with newspapers. Newspapers are far less competitive now than they used to be. It is harder to get cooperation with a commercial news organization. They're owned by corporate parents who are very much concerned about maintaining market share and not sharing content. But newspapers don't feel that way, and they recognize that we have fewer boots on the ground collectively to do the work that's important to do. So we get good cooperation from newspapers. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for coming today. It's been very interesting hearing your conversations. Does WITF have competition from other PBS stations in the area, and if so, who are they?
Pennsylvania has 7 public television stations, and for the most part, they don't overlap. There's one exception, and it doesn't affect us. So there's a station in Erie, in State College, in Pittsburgh, here in Harrisburg, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Allentown, and Philadelphia. Allentown is in the Philadelphia market, so those 2 stations, WLVT and WHYY, are direct overlap and competitors. The rest of us, while our coverage areas sort of are adjacent to each other and maybe they overlap a little, it's not significant. There are lots of places around the country where there is direct competition among PBS stations, but it's really not much of a factor in Pennsylvania except for WLVT and WHYY in Philadelphia. Now there are about 15 public radio stations in the state. The places I just mentioned all have a radio station with the exception of the Allentown PBS station. They don't have radio, at least at the moment. So 7 of those public radio stations, again, they don't overlap very much and they cooperate, and they are part of a public radio network that we operate, WITF. So we are the state government news source for those public radio stations. The other 7 or 8 of them are, to be candid, college sandbox radio stations. So they're not much, they're non-commercial, but they're not really public radio. So I shouldn't make fun of sandbox stations because there are a lot of journalists get their start at college stations. Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot for coming today. I really love your 3 principles that you have for guiding PA Post, and certainly appreciate and value them, but what if most people don't appreciate and value them? And what if the majority of people don't really care about all of that? How do you compete, and how do you matter in that environment then?
You're getting to the core of the how do you rebuild trust, because if you're not interested, it may be because you don't trust what you read, what you see. We've come to believe that in a world in which the technology drives and dominates our lives, where we're looking at screens all the time, the most powerful form of engagement and trust building is face-to-face communication. So it can take the form of those news and brews events that we do. We also take our daily radio show, Smart Talk, on the road so that you can attend a Smart Talk live broadcast, and we do that all over the region. Another way isn't directly related to news, but puts us in front of people, and that is that we do about, I would say, 60 in-classroom events every year in Harrisburg City, Lancaster City, and York City for kindergarten, first, and second graders. And we distribute books free at all of those events to the kids. And that filters, if you will, outward to the family. And we do much bigger events, and we're going to bring one to Lancaster this fall. In every August for now 9 years, we do a very large event at the Public Media Center called Ready, Set, Go Kindergarten. And it's for the kids who are going to be kindergartners in that school year. About 1,000 people come that Saturday day, long morning basically. Games, learning experiences, costume characters, the whole thing, to help the kids feel more comfortable about going to school. Now, we thought actually it was all about helping the kids feel comfortable about going to school. As a matter of fact, that's not it. The kids are fine. The parents are freaked out. So we're helping the parents feel more comfortable. We're going to bring that same event on a smaller scale to Lancaster in September, I believe. So we'll have 2 events this year. So there will be a certain subset of persons who are completely disinterested in the broader civic life. And I believe in working with the willing. So if you're genuinely disinterested, not turned off or dissuaded, but just disinterested, then perhaps we can't reach you. But if what has kept you from paying attention to what legislators are doing on your behalf or to you, I think we can make some headway there. So. Thank you.